So welcome everyone to our weekly wellness webinar. Today we will be talking about self-care, which is part two of the webinar series that we had last week on attunement. And Gemma and I will be talking about it today on how to develop your own self-care practice.
Yeah, so just a little outline of what we're going to be talking about. I still can't see the roadmap.
All right, sorry, that moved a little fast.
Okay.
Do you see it now?
Sorry, no, I still can't. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. So just kind of to go over what we're going to be talking about. We're going to define self-care, explain the connection between self-care and attunement, talk about the importance of self-care and kind of destigmatize some of the common associations people have with self-care, and then some things to consider when working on your own self-care practice. And then we're going to do a little guided reflection at the end.
Yeah, so if you guys can see the screen right now, it says, what is self-care? So the definition we'll be using is that care is the process of making decisions and the action of addressing your mental and physical needs. So we're highlighting the fact that it's about making decisions and taking action, specifically addressing the needs that you are tuning in.
Yeah, and then so moving on to the connection between attunement and self-care. So in case you missed the webinar last week or need a little refresher, attunement is kind of tuning into your body's needs and your body's cues. And then self-care is the action taken to address those body cues. And then a third really important component is an attunement disruptor, which is basically anything that keeps you from being able to remain tuned into your body's needs and then addressing them. And so a little example, if you're a little bit confused about the connection, is, for example, if you're stressed out, let's say you have body cues like increased heart rate, or you just feel kind of tightness in your chest or something. So attunement would be recognizing your body's cues and recognizing that you feel stressed. And then the self-care solution to that would be maybe something like doing a guided meditation, journaling, going for a walk, talking to someone you love. So that's just one example.
Yeah, so in that case, why is self-care important? Gemma kind of talked a little bit about the fact that because it's a two-part piece, it really is about addressing your needs. And so self-care really just enables you to maintain your body and mind. And without it, it's really hard to put in energy into other things you really care about, such as passions and relationships. So it's hard to put in energy to people you care about or to different projects that you're working on. But sometimes people don't exactly see it this way.
Yeah, so now we're gonna do a little like self-care mythbusters, because there are a lot of stigmas surrounding self-care and mental health in general. So one myth is that self-care is just pampering, so like taking bubble baths and doing face masks like you might see in like advertisements or on TV or something. And the fact actually is that self-care is essential. It's not trivial. And taking care of yourself is not selfish or weak or lazy. It's essential for your health. Another myth is that self-care is used as a reward after a stressful or tiring activity. So kind of reserving self-care to reward yourself. It's something that you have to earn. Whereas the fact is that self-care is actually proactive, not reactive, or at least the self-care that we're really promoting. So building resilience to weather bad times and to make you more perseverant in life and kind of able to weather those difficult times. Yeah, so moving on to the aspects of self-care.
Yeah, so focusing on different areas that you can care for yourself. One of them is physical. And so when you think about it, when you're leading busy lives and have different things affecting the way you kind of take care of yourself, one example would be that you often skip meals when you're pressed for time. But instead, what you could do for self-care is listen to your body and tune in those cues and then eat when you're hungry specifically. And it doesn't have to do only with the way that you nourish your body, but it could also be something around sleep. So for instance, a disruptor could be that you often sleep less just to achieve more, but self-care would be to prioritize sleep and make sure that if you don't get sleep the night before, to get sleep the day after.
So moving on to mental and emotional aspects of self-care. Sorry, I'm still waiting for the screen to load. There's a bit of a delay. But one example of an attunement disruptor is handling your difficult emotions by ignoring them or pretending that they don't exist. And then maybe a self-care alternative to this attunement disruptor, or a way to address it, would be that when you're experiencing difficult emotions, you explore them through journaling or by speaking with someone you trust. Another aspect, a lot of the emotional and mental aspects of self-care have to do with guilt and not prioritizing yourself. And so another example of an attunement disruptor is feeling guilty for not being productive enough. I know that's something really common at Carleton, or just kind of in general for people who are working on something academic. And then the self-care alternative to that would be forgiving yourself for not being productive, because sometimes you do need an emotional and mental break.
Yeah. And so the third aspect of self-care, if it loads, is relationships. And so that's also an aspect of self-care that needs attention. And so for an attunement disruptor, it could often feel that you try not to burden friends or family with your problems, but instead a self-care strategy would be to ask for help or support when you need it. And in addition to that, it could also be that when you're stressed out, you push people out. Sometimes when you're really busy, it's hard to focus on other people that really care about you or that you actually need to support you. But a self-care strategy would be to actually make time for those people that you need and kind of build them into your schedule if you can.
Mm-hmm. So now moving on to things to consider concerning self-care. So when it comes to attunement disruptors and then what self-care will properly address your needs, it can really change by context. So your self-care practice might need to be altered depending on your setting, available resources, and current priorities. So like one example that I know a lot of us are going through right now is we're all in quarantine, or at least mostly in quarantine. And your self-care practice and your needs might be a lot different than how they are at school or how they are even when you're at home regularly, but you're allowed to kind of go outside and socialize. A personal example for me is that I'm a pretty social person. I love hanging out with friends. I find like hanging out with groups of people to be really cathartic a lot of the time. But now that we're in quarantine, obviously that's not an option. And I find like Zoom parties to be kind of exhausting and hard to communicate. But then but then instead what I've started doing is having like one-on-one conversations, or doing like a Netflix party or something with my friends, where I still get to work on the relationships and strengthen the relationships, but it's something that is altered to kind of fit my current circumstances. And then consistency is another really important aspect of self-care, because it requires like not only addressing your body cues, but also kind of building a self-care practice and being proactive. So important aspects of that are establishing boundaries, which could be in relationships, but also with commitments, and practicing saying no. Yeah. Tracy,
Yeah, and adding on to that, yeah, I was just going to say, so in other examples of attunement disruptors might also be just what your current priorities are. So whether we're in school and you have different seasons as an athlete, sometimes your priorities might be different, and that means that your self-care strategies should be tailored to address those needs and those priorities. And then in terms of consistency, what we're really trying to emphasize is that in order to practice good self-care, it's about creating an attitude and a mindset that can really set up success in self-care. And that has to do with creating those routines, creating that structure to let yourself practice self-care in a way that is just much easier to do. And in terms of making the right choices, sometimes what you are choosing between is doing something like, do I want to be watching TV and be relaxed, or should I do maybe a quick yoga sequence? And sometimes making that choice is really hard. And so in order to do that, we suggest maybe thinking about a time you've done each of those things and think, what do I want to be right now? Do I want to be more relaxed or more refreshed given each action? And then hopefully that can help make those better choices. But again, all of that involves tuning into what your body needs, but then also channeling that self-care strategy given what you want and what is available around you and what your current circumstances are. So also being, forgiving with yourself. If you are going to be consistent with the different practices that you add into your schedule and into your routine, also be flexible, because being very disciplined with certain things can feel really rigid. And sometimes if it is too rigid, then you can kind of turn to a breaking point and lose that self-care altogether. So definitely emphasizing attitudes and routine and forgiveness and consistency. So that leads us to some reflection questions. And as they're on the screen, it's what self-care practices do you use or want to start using? So maybe taking the time right now to think about what we've said and think of maybe some ways that you can add more self-care into your routine. Are there any categories of self-care that haven't currently been addressed? We've kind of broken it down a little bit in different aspects. So maybe see whether or not some areas have been addressed or not, and then what categories of self-care might need more attention or perhaps just some consistency if it is about having them be more scheduled into your routine, or if maybe you need just some flexibility and forgiveness as well. Okay.
Great. So thank you for attending the webinar. If you have any questions, we can stop the recording and open the chat for questions, or we can just talk over the screen. Yeah, thank you so much.